Welcome to season 2 of the Indicator podcast. This season, we are focusing on the Footprint Evaluation Initiative, and we're talking today to Andy Rowe. Welcome, Andy Rowe. It's very nice to have you with us.
It's nice to be here.
So, Andy, you've been a leading thinker on systems and complexity in the evaluation space for a very, very long time, right? Why now are you giving time and attention to this human natural systems question? And what has shifted for you recently?
First of all, I want to acknowledge that I'm on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish Nation, and it's a privilege to be here. And I think in introduction, the thing we need to do is introduce ourselves, who we are and where we come from, and our connectivity to the original owners and the space that we occupy. And my origin story on this continent really goes back several centuries to forced emigration of my father's family from Ireland, ending up in Newfoundland. And they left Newfoundland, which is a large island off the northeast coast of North America. They left Newfoundland shortly after my father was born in 1900. And my father ended up working in the boreal forests of Canada and was one of the early members of the early crews who mapped these boreal forests after the displacement of the original occupants, human occupants, the indigenous nations that were already there. And they traveled about by canoe, snowshoe, and train. And they walked this huge territory. And what they were doing is that they were looking at the trees. And when they looked at a tree, their eyes, what they saw was the number of board feet in that tree that they had an unquestionable right to. And they
Right.
were mapping the volume of board feet and how you could get those trees out.
Which is another way of thinking about dollars, right?
It's all about colonial exploration, expropriation.
Extraction.
There was an action that was repeated in every country where the European and other colonists went. They were after what they termed natural resources, but were actually systems, thriving systems that they were going to extract from. Now, when I came along and became an evaluator, of some presence and role in evaluation in Canada, I evaluated a lot of what are called natural resource undertakings to do with the forest, the oceans, the ground, and the air. And I spent the first 15 years, perhaps almost 20 years, doing that without ever once considering natural systems. What we
Wow.
considered was how much employment, how much economy could be generated. And the programs, provincial and federal programs, and private sector actions to do so. And we just assumed, as my father's generation did, it's all there, take what you want.
Endless.
Endless. At some point, to the surprise of government, actually, it wasn't to their surprise, they knew it was going to happen, but they denied it for a long time. The fish, the ground fish on the northeast coast of North America disappeared. There were no more fish. They had to close the fishery. This was the largest industrial closure in the history of Canada. And
So
we
what year?
evaluated.
What kind of?
It was roughly speaking, I would say it was the mid to late 1980s.
Okay. That tracks.
Yeah. And, 15, 20 years without noticing environment without including and mentioning it. I lived in a cabin on the coast of Newfoundland. In grad school, I dove for the Marine Research Lab. I drank beer. My social activities were drinking beer with grad students in natural sciences. So I had one world where I knew the natural system existed, but professionally, what I came to do ignored it totally. And I
Right.
lived in that dichotomy. And I think
Right.
evaluation is like that. I don't think evaluators are ignorant of natural systems, but evaluation doesn't
Make
facilitate, encourage, direct them to incorporate
right.
natural systems.
Right.
So it's not individuals' faults, it's a system. Ah, pulled that out of my ear. You might want to
Evalu-
edit edit that. uh, so we ignored that. So that evaluation, that very large evaluation of the government response didn't really, their response to the failure of the natural systems was stop all harvesting. We closed the fishery for, 4 or 5 years, mad research, hoping and fingers crossed that the fish would come back. And
which
actually
they
they
did.
did, which they have. Yes,
Yeah.
slowly.
So what's
But
your
but let me
take?
give you an example. When I was diving for the Marine Lab, we dove every year off of Black Tickle on the coast of Labrador, which is basically indigenous territory on the east coast, northeast coast of North America.
Okay.
And we would have to push our way through groundfish, through codfish. And every 30 feet or so, there would be a new type of codfish swimming in a different direction, different size, different densities. And we lost daylight, we lost vision at around 40 feet or so. Normally,
Not
you
like that
would,
anymore.
15 years later, the the main diver who I supported, I ran into him in the streets of St. John's, and he said he was just came back from Black Tickle and he saw one fish on the way down. So
Wow.
from in 15 years, packed top to bottom to one. That's how drastic and how rapid. And this is going on today in all kinds of other systems. So that evaluation of the groundfish industry was eye-opening for me in what we excluded and how we contributed in doing evaluations to the crisis that was occurring because we didn't
You
include natural
contributed as
systems.
evaluators by choosing not to look at a whole lot of very important things.
That's right. So we
Right.
were getting it wrong. Our evaluative conclusions were wrong because they
You're wrong.
ignored, and we contributed. We were partners in the extinction process.
Okay. Well, look,
Now,
let's. Yeah.
fast
Yeah.
forward to the second
Yeah.
hinge point in when was it? Around 2015. I was part of an evaluation team working with a large horizontal or thematic evaluation of International Fund for Agricultural Development, looking at basically 10 years of IFAD support for smallholder farmers in climate adaptation. And it started out ignoring natural systems. I happened to mention, well, why don't we, in part of the design, why don't we also include natural systems? The response was overwhelmingly positive. Just never occurred to them before. They said, yes, can we do that? And I said, yes,
But
we know how
Andy,
to do that.
slow you down. When you say include natural systems, what do you mean? Like, be very specific.
Put them into our theory of change
Right.
and figure out how to address them. We did it in that evaluation by having a companion study that was very small, very modest, used mixed methods, introduced a few questions into the country case studies that were going on, and we built from that, and we achieved results that were impossible for the best efforts of those who wanted to ignore natural systems. It sustained let's say, the sustained attack or criticism uh, of of this.
So,
And
Andy,
that was a tough audience.
I want to. So, you've mentioned a couple of things that have shaped your thinking on that have led to kind of your footprint evaluation initiative work, and it links to work you've done previously on systems thinking for. I know you don't really use the word yourself, but I'm going to call it transformative evaluation. And you've argued that evaluators need to argue with systems as they really are, not as programs imagine them to be in their sort of streamlined, summarized ways. When you apply that lens to ecological systems, what do you think it is that evaluation currently gets wrong?
I think there are 2 points. First of all, we ignore it. 95% of evaluations ignore natural systems. So,
And we know that's true, right? We've been looking at
yeah,
these portfolios and we see they don't look at natural systems.
yeah. And on footprint evaluation, you'll see 3 simple questions that will get you to where you can report on the intervention's attitude or stance to natural systems. Very simple questions. And these were questions that were initially applied or drawn from what were initially applied when evaluation in Canada ignored gender. And some
Okay.
evaluators just started asking these questions. And that was part of the move to mainstream gender, to where Canada became a leading contributor to gender-based analysis and evaluation.
And now
So
leads in a lot of sort of gender informed evaluation practice, particularly.
that's right. 3
Huh?
simple questions.
So
So they're
tell us
there on foot.
questions.
Well, let's just direct people to the footprint evaluation
Okay.
page. But
So we'll
basically,
in the
ba-
show notes, we'll link to the page on the Footprint website that leads to the
great.
question.
Yeah. But it sort of starts from the premise that everything we do draws from natural systems and leaves a mark on natural systems. So the basic, and all countries have directions, policies, commitments on environment. So the first question is, what are you doing to address these commitments? And then the subsequent questions just articulate from there. They aren't in their face. They aren't challenging. They just ask for information and say, well, we're going to have to report on this because it's part of the setting. And thank you. That's it. The second thing, aside from asking those basic questions, is redo the theory of change. 95% of evaluation ignore, 95% of interventions ignore, so they won't be in their theories of change. Theories of change are established. You can't make them retrospectively change and redo their interventions, but you can expand the theory of change to include what would normally be called unintended or unexpected effects on the environment. I call them ignored effects. These are things we know are there. We just choose to ignore them.
And we know they're likely to take place. We just don't want to write them down because they make the
That's right.
program correctly.
So bring those into the theory of change. So if you say,
Right.
well, here's the theory of change for the intervention. Well, they're
Yeah.
out here. They're scattered around and they might have arrows or lines or however you choose to portray it, just include
Reflect that.
them.
Right.
Put
Yeah.
them there so that
Yeah.
they're on the agenda. And
Right.
that sets up your questions. Well, but they're not doing anything on this. And that hopefully will help turn on the light bulb so that in the next iteration of this intervention, they'll include it. But there's something else you should do in the theory of change. And we have formal structures for how you design and conduct an evaluation. And they're a bit hard to work with. On our footprint evaluation website, you'll find things like how to really bring environment to the OECD DAC criteria or how to develop key evaluation questions. So that's all there. I want to talk about something else. I want you to go to the place of the intervention. Now, the place is a place of coupled human and natural systems. Maybe, but unlikely, you can actually go there physically yourself prior to designing the evaluations, prior to completing the theory of change, but that's unlikely. You're probably going to have to go there using secondary sources that are widely available, using remote stuff, remote sensing, GIS, and that sort of stuff. It's amazing what you can do there. And by talking to people, not just what are commonly called stakeholders, those who have a stake in the intervention, and therefore probably reflect the original theory of change. Talk to what we call the interests, those who are affected by and can affect the intervention, but are not part of the stakeholder community. That's where you're going to find value. Just talk to them. Find people to talk to. Who else should I talk to? What other interests are present in this intervention? And use what they give you to expand the theory of change. Now, you're going to have some discussions. So you need to assure the intervention, and particularly the managers and the people they report to, I'm not holding you accountable for that. In my case, what I use is a bright red dashed line, and I put it around what you're accountable for, which is closer to your original theory of change. But I'm responsible as an evaluator to note these other effects that you are generating, that you are causing, or you're choosing not to address in your intervention. I just need to note them, that they exist. And then we'll proceed with what's inside the line, inside those boxes. It's not that
Although,
hard to do.
we know that that's a hard needle to thread, right? I mean, to say to somebody, I see you having these dismal effects on the context, but I don't hold you responsible. But let's come back to that. And I want to keep moving on these questions. So,
Let me just say one thing on that.
yeah,
10 years ago, it was impossible to do that.
right.
Today, it's relatively easy to do that.
Well, I think it's a kind of consequence of complexity, right? Like people are starting to understand there's a lot more going on than I can ever hope to control. So let me at least acknowledge that.
And polycrisis.
Polycrisis. Now, so I want to talk about causal inference and the way in which we come to understand contributions and causal complexity in social systems. You've suggested ways to tackle these questions in evaluations in complex coupled human natural systems. Where does it start to strain when the causal system includes non-linear ecological processes and intergenerational timeframes, which is a fancy way of saying when stuff is operating on such different rhythms, really, and you're trying to evaluate an intervention in those terms?
There's another element of this too, which is results-based management.
Ah,
So I can't talk about that without bringing it in because that's the
good.
context of a lot of
So say the
evaluation.
things.
And I want to give you a concrete example. About
Okay.
a decade ago, maybe 15 years ago, uh, I was evaluating programs restoring the Chesapeake Bay watershed on the northeast coast of the United States. It's a
So
huge and really
yeah,
important watershed, line
just
off of New York.
huge and
It's
very yeah.
absolutely critical.
Okay.
Everything, livelihoods, weather, birds, just everything depends and is affected by this. So, and one of the things that ecologists are concerned with, quite rightly, in restoring things is the presence of invasive species. Organisms have traveled all around the world, and they might be marine, they might be terrestrial, they might be insects, or, from really tiny microscopic to really big things. And in this evaluation of the Chesapeake Bay watershed, we were dealing with a really big thing, which is invasive plants that had somehow found their way to the watershed lands and were smothering, taking over the ecosystems that were there. And so, quite rightly, these programs were trying to eradicate these invasive species. So they cleared them along important rivers and really large tract. They just cleared them out, and that got them a really positive score on the Government Performance Results Act, this sort of results-based management structure in the federal government in the U.S., which recorded the number of miles or kilometers of watershed that have been cleared.
Right.
We were going back 3 or 4 years after they had been cleared, and we found absolutely positively the best predictor of the presence of invasive species was that the program had removed them 2 or 3 years previously.
Because they came back with a vengeance.
Because you cleared a great space for them. You hadn't eradicated them. And the Government Performance Results Act gives you no credit for maintaining
Right.
the clearance that you had done. Now, irony on ironies, the programs I was evaluating were called community-based conservation and restoration in the watershed. The communities were perfectly happy to maintain these. They'd never been asked, they'd never been supported. So the Government Performance Results Act drove an increase in the environmental degradation of important indicators in the Chesapeake Bay.
But somebody somewhere got a performance bonus because they hit their target, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Andy,
And they
we've got
got
to
more,
go
they got more
'cause-
funding.
Yeah,
So,
there was more money in the budget. Listen,
and
we got to
I,
go. We got to keep going, dude. We're slow. We
okay,
running behind. Okay, so in your work on complexity responsive evaluation, and I'm kind of pitching Footprint as within this complexity responsive evaluation frame, you've pushed back against approaches that really could have crudify what's being evaluated. Is the way most evaluations treat the natural world, meaning as context rather than as a system, a form of exactly that kind of simplification?
absolutely. And that's because of our worldview and our mindset. Our worldview is that these resources are free for us to take. We have no responsibility for them. And our mindset that is zero sum, where we say you can have economy or gender or equity or environment. Which one do you want? That's
Right.
crap. We need
Yeah.
and that's where we talk about in a recent conference. We've now established the power of and as the mindset that we need going forward. We need economy, we need equity, we need gender, we need environment, and. And there are lots of disciplines, lots of practice around the world that tell us how to do that. The ones I draw from are environmental conflict resolution or dispute resolution, sustainability science, which is a large and growing field, CHANS, coupled human and natural systems, drawing on the work of Nobel Prize winner Ostrom. So this is established, but there's something we really miss, and there's a connectivity that is there. Go back to my father. He looked at a forest and he saw a board feet of lumber.
Yeah.
And the world of forest management hasn't changed that much, but it is changing. Over the last 3 decades, we've now have sustainable forest management standards. We have certification. They include communities, they include labor, but a fundamental change is happening. Female foresters are uncovering a world where they recognize forests as connected organisms, not just of trees or a bunch of trees or beech or Douglas fir stands or anything like that, but of coupled organisms, microbial threads underground. We've now estimated there are 621 trillion miles of fungi networks in the world. 621 trillion miles. And these are the communications and transport networks underground
Okay,
for
and don't go. This
forests
is
and
going to
ecosystems.
zombie terror. Oh my God, the mushrooms are going to eat us.
We eat them. And
Okay, I'm going to go
we
on.
live off the stuff that they
No, we
enable
do.
to
Thanks God for
thrive.
them. So you've written about the difference between evaluations that are about complexity and then evaluations that actually are designed for complexity. And I'm thinking about it, footprint evaluation approach obviously, but what would an evaluation genuinely designed for human natural systems complexity look like in practice?
So on the well, let's start with Jeff IEO. In particular,
Yes,
look at their
Global
recent
environmental facility, right?
independent evaluation office of the Global Environment Facility,
Yeah.
uh, which has global responsibilities for ecosystems and biodiversity. And over the past 15 years or so, they've been addressing coupled human and natural systems. And a recent evaluation of co-benefits uh, of Jeff programs is a good example. And they use remote technologies to be able to incorporate human and natural systems in the same gaze, in the same outlook.
Just
We
explain the
did
word coupled. What does coupled mean?
um, couple really just means what it says. At
Link, join.
621 trillion miles of microbial networks are coupling trees and humans and all the other stuff that is there. And they're essential. And when our gaze falls on what it is we're to evaluate, it needs to include what's below ground and what's above ground. And we have the technology to do this now. GIS, or remote sensing, just using with the help of a grad student, allowed us to look below ground at the flows of water in Uganda
Which
to
even 10
assess.
years ago would have been so difficult to access that data and virtually unavailable to some random event.
Unavailable, and
Yeah,
which I couldn't see. This was on tanneries, and
right.
I've worked on tanneries quite a lot. And when I walk the landscape over tanneries, I'm fooled by the slope of the land. Whereas underground, it might flow the other way. We can go to that place of the intervention much better using these technologies. So the footprint evaluation contributed to an evaluation in Colombia of national IT systems. And that's an example of coupled systems and what it would look like. Um, the IFAD evaluation of smallholder climate adaptation, that evaluation really asks the question, adaptation for who? And IFAD interventions were fundamentally IFAD helping smallholders adapt for their benefit. But the evaluation asked adaptation for humans and natural systems, the power of and. And it showed that we need to intervene in the natural systems as a precondition for helping the human systems actually adapt. So that's what we mean coupled. We cannot improve smallholder farmers. We can't form gender equity without transforming how we work and without restoring natural systems. Because we reach that critical threshold where they're so stressed out that they're not going to be able to support us in doing that. So that's what smallholder farmers, that's what smallholder uh, adaptation tells us. And that's what coupled systems mean for us. We can no longer have improvement in human conditions without first addressing improvement in natural systems.
So, Andy, the next two questions on the list are pretty similar. So, I'm going to just ask the second one. And it's this thing about you've seen interesting, and I think you've been involved in developing promising methodological innovations. And I'm thinking, when I first met you back in the day, I think you were involved in rapid impact evaluation, and you've kind of been thinking a lot about this stuff. And yet the field kind of the caravan passes, right? It continues traveling on its way. And I'm thinking about if Footprint was to succeed and to kind of transform evaluative practice so that it does do what it seeks to achieve, which is integrate environmental sustainability into all evaluations. What is needed for Footprint to play that kind of a role?
So, evaluation in general is obsessed with precision and evidence. and wants more and more evidence in the belief or the pursuit of decision makers making the right decision. And let me give you an example from the Chesapeake Bay. There are millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of electronic gear floating around the Chesapeake Bay, recording in detail all kinds of changes. And Bernie Fowler was a Maryland
Like
state senator.
how many measures of the same thing do you really need when it's just telling you the same thing every time?
Yes, and Bernie Fowler was the co-chair of the committee that allocated funds to the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay and to all these scientists doing all their work. And he grew up on the Chesapeake Bay, and he got fed up with scientists being unable to answer. So what does all your data tell us? What should I do?
Which is
Should
the
I
classic
increase funding?
evaluation
How should I do it?
So
That's
what?
right. And so what he did is he put on a pair of white running shoes and he waded into an important river and watched until he lost sight of his running shoes. And he took a yardstick and he measured how deep that was. And
Okay.
he did that every year. And the scientists were up in arms. How can you do this? Eventually, they came to agree, well, this really is a good indicator of suspended sediments. And suspended sediments are really an important indicator of the health of the Chesapeake Bay.
Ecosystem health.
Yeah, but what's really important is this became a movement. So every year is Bernie Fowler Day. It's called the Sneaker Index. And people have songs and gatherings, and they wade into the river and they measure when they lose sight of their what Americans call sneakers, their running shoes. This is what we need.
Right.
Yeah, this is what we need. And this is what footprint evaluation is trying to provide. It's really simple things that will turn on the light bulbs, not endless pursuit of more and more precision that will never convince anyone because it's incomprehensible.
Nobody knows what those numbers mean anyway.
That's right. And you can find the sneaker indexes when you go to the community.
Okay, you know what?
When
I'm
you
going to
ask,
actually find something and try and link it in the chat here at this point on the sneaker
okay,
index, if it exists. Hope you didn't just make it up, Andy.
nope, you look up Bernie Fowler, the sneaker index.
Okay. Okay, this
Right
is my
now,
last.
it's 41.5 inches.
What do you see? I don't know what that means. Is that good or bad? Anyway, we'll come back to this, okay?
They have a time series.
Okay, I'll check it out. Let's see where the baseline was. Okay, Andy, thank you very much. This has been a great conversation. I have a last question for you. If you could change one thing about how the evaluation field is currently training the next generation of evaluators to prepare them for this challenge, what would that one thing be?
Well, it's the training of evaluators in the United States is largely through university programs.
Right.
In Canada, traditionally, and much of the world, it's through practice.
Right.
You're working somewhere and it's something you do. And university programs are being added on top throughout the world to whatever, supplement this, replace this, whatever. But all of those university programs and all of that practice, 95% of evaluations ignore natural systems. Only recently have I discovered any mention of natural systems in any university program. So let's just start doing it. There's no practice to join that is already doing it. The young evaluators and the middle distance evaluators, those have been around for a while, everyday life is telling you what's going on in polycrisis. Start asking that question. I asked a question in the IFAD evaluation. It was already designed. They had spent a year designing the evaluation. And then they brought me on as the first external person before they concluded it. And I went along with it for a while. No light bulbs went on in my head. And then one did. And I said, well, what about natural systems? That question was enough to get it introduced.
Right.
with a manager who was open and knew how to do it,
who knew how to have the natural systems conversation.
knew how to introduce natural systems conversation into the evaluation, into the evaluation shop, gain permission. And it was agriculture, so they already knew that agriculture was one of the most harmful, environmentally harmful activities in the world, and yet we have this fundamental need for more food. So it was a ripe, when we talk in footprint evaluation, or more importantly in sustainability science, they look for ripe moments, ripe decision-making moments, where the obvious can be introduced and accepted and grasped. We do that in evaluation, in footprint evaluation. And that's what I would like the evaluation field to do. And that's what I would like younger and emerging evaluators and middle distance evaluators start challenging the rest of evaluation and showing that we can do this.
It's been a great conversation, Andy. Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye now.